When your visual pun comes out of the kiln, you'll notice that the color is much whiter, it's much harder, and it's much more durable. They can still break if you have small little details, so you do have to still be cautious with it. The first thing you want to do, it might feel a little bit gritty, so I've already done this step. Go over to the sink and you can rinse off any dust that might have settled on it. So the next steps you want to do are picking your colors. So we are using something called glaze. Glaze comes in containers like this, and they are different than acrylic paint because if you just use acrylic paint, you could get the color, but it won't be shiny and it won't be glass-like. Glaze gives you this nice shiny glass-like coating, and it also protects your sculpture. It makes it a little bit stronger, and it really, glaze highlights your details very nicely in a way that acrylic paint would not. But it does need to go in the kiln for a second time after you glaze. In order to pick out your glaze color, you want to consult the glazing tiles. The reason why you want to do this is because this is what they look like after they come out of the kiln, but sometimes they can look very different beforehand. For instance, this color kind of looks like a pink or purpley color, but you'll paint it on, it'll look like this, and it's actually dark blue. So when it comes out of the kiln, it transforms into this. That's because the high heat of the kiln is going to affect the chemicals that are in the glaze, and it's going to change the colors. Some of them are just changed a little, and some of them, like dark blue, are changed a lot. So you have to be very careful when selecting your colors that you remember what color you pick, because it won't always look like what you think it will be. Okay, so when you're ready to start glazing, we're going to be using different brushes than we used when we did our acrylic paintings. We're going to be using these plastic handled brushes. They're a little smaller, a little bit softer bristles. And you're going to just take one glaze at a time for your project. Even if you have a whole bunch of colors, you're really just going to take one glaze at a time. That way we minimize the risk of things mixing, and that way everyone has turns of different colors. So because mine is a pumpkin, I'm going to pick an orange color. So I'm going to pick Vivid Orange. Now, whenever you get your glaze, you always want to give it a little shake first, but you don't want to do this at your table because sometimes the lids don't fit on properly, and sometimes they come popping off. And I've had students hold it like this and go like this to shake, and the whole thing the lid comes flying off, and the whole glaze goes spilling everywhere. So what you're going to do is you're going to try to make sure the lid is on as tight as possible. Put your hand over the lid in case it's loose, and you go over to the sink, and over the sink you give it a little shake. The reason why we do this is because sometimes the sediment settles, the heavier chemicals settle, and the lighter watery stuff goes to the top, and we want to mix it all together. But again, only over the sink, bring your hand over this, because I get spills all the time with students that forget to do that. So just in case, over the sink is where you want to do that. Okay, so you open up your glaze, and you pick a brush that's the correct size. So for smaller details, I would pick a smaller brush. For bigger areas, I'm going to pick this larger brush. And I'm going to paint everything except for the bottom. But if there's glaze on the bottom, it will also stick to my kiln shelf, which means that I can't get it off without breaking your project. So you don't want to get any glaze on the bottom. And at the very end, you're actually going to wash it off just in case. So you're going to dip your brush directly into the glazes. Do not pour the glazes onto any sort of palette or cup. Even if someone on the other side of the room has your color, you're either going to get up and go sit next to that person, or you'll wait and do a different color in the meantime. Do not distribute this into another container. Okay, so you're going to paint it on directly, as long as your brush is clean. If you have little areas, like I don't want that to be this color, so I'm going to be careful about getting around but not on the stalk. Okay, and any grooved areas, you don't want to leave anything white. You want to glaze everything. Now when it comes time to for my details, again, very carefully I'm going to paint around because because I want that pie to be a different color so it stands out. Now if I got, oops, I got color there. I don't want color there. Unlike with paint, this can't stay. So with paint, you would just let it dry and paint over it with another color, and not a big deal. But with glaze, what's gonna happen is when it goes into the kiln, it might melt back up. So you might think it's covered, you put another color on top of it, and you might think it's all good, but then it'll show back up and it'll look super messy. So what you wanna do is have a wet, damp paper towel, and as long as the part that you did already is not wet, or it has no glaze on there, you just wipe it off with a wet paper towel. It might stain it a little bit, but as long as the thick part's off, then you're good to go. Okay, so you're gonna do this whole, your whole area with that whatever color you want. One thin layer. Okay, so I just finished my first layer, and you can see that it's mostly dry already. That's not enough. If I were to finish with just one layer, it would still look really rough and not that nice glossy glazed glass look. So what you're actually gonna do is 3 layers. So if you could see here that it's darker when it is wet, you wanna wait till it turns this light, like the lighter color, and it feels dry. Then it's ready for your second layer. So you're gonna do 3 layers. So I'm gonna do the next layer, let that dry, and do my third layer. Sometimes the first layer is easy to tell what you've done and what you haven't. The second and third layer, it's difficult to tell. So what you don't want to do is not pay attention, be talking with your friends, and end up doing one area 4, 5, 6 times and have it super, super thick because you just weren't paying attention, and then have some areas where you only did it once or twice. Really pay attention to what you're doing and how many layers you have. If you get above 3 layers, it runs the risk of dripping, and we don't want that to happen. It'll look ugly, it will ruin my kiln. We don't want that to happen. So 3 thin layers, letting them dry in between. Now I had shown you how to remove glaze by using the wet paper towel when you had glaze where there wasn't any. But let's say I get glaze where I did have something. I don't want to keep that either, but if I use a wet paper towel to remove it, I'm gonna have to redo the orange as well. So that's not ideal either. So what you can do instead, if you find one of these clay tools that look like a little loop, now this works better if it was dry already, but it can work a little bit right now too. Very gently, you're going to scrape off that other color. Now, if you scrape too much, you're gonna scrape off the orange or whatever other color is underneath it as well. But if you're very gentle with it, you can just remove that top color and it keeps the bottom color. Now, maybe you wanna take a tiny bit of orange and just fix up that spot, but this does protect it and it keeps your edges cleaner. Here's the project before it goes into the kiln.